Hello there, and welcome in a sense to Digital Foundry Direct Weekly 169. A huge amount of news topics to get through, but before we do that, a quick shout out to our store.digitalfoundry.net. We have now available for sale the white bespoke t-shirt. I was going to say I'm modelling it, but I'm more wearing it, and here it is. We also have apparently the bespoke zip-up hoodie, so check that out. But also something which I'd like to get my hands on actually is the DF Fighters mouse pad. It's one of those huge jumbo pads, which is really, really cool. So do check that out. Let's get straight on to the panel. Hi, Alex Battaglia. How you doing?
I'm well. Melting a little bit. It's 28
Yes.
and humid, to say the least, here. And I've got a variety of PCs and large televisions and a very powerful lights shining on me. So if I start sweating profusely during this episode, I'm terribly sorry, but this is just the way it is.
Okay, and sitting in the cone of air-conditioned delight, it's John Linneman.
Yes, I am firmly entrenched in the cone zone over here where it's nice and chilly. Enjoying my AC unit here, sipping on a little of that Mueller Allgaier
Allgäuer Dickmilch. Yeah, I still don't know what makes it thick. It's a little bit disturbing.
Would you like some, Alex? You want
some Dickmilch? Deine dicke Milch? Okay.
Did you actually see that in the store? Did you buy it? I mean, do you put it on your cereal? What's going on?
Of course. What else do you do with it?
I brush
Put
my
it on your
teeth
Frosted
with it.
Flakes.
You tell me. Okay. And okay, that's fair enough. Let's crack on with our first news topic of the week. Okay, so this one dropped yesterday, and we don't really have a full analysis ready for you yet, but we kind of have some first impressions, I guess. FSR 3.1, the rendition of AMD's upscaler that has new spatial quality improvements, has quote-unquote dropped. It's arrived on pretty much the entirety of Nix's PlayStation ports for PC.
Right.
I've had a very, very quick look at it. And Alex, you've had a very, very short time to grab a couple of captures and compare it to your legacy FSR 2.2 captures.
Yes.
So I guess we'll go straight to you on that.
Okay, so just as a quick, what is FSR 3.1? FSR 3.1 is going to update both the frame generation and the spatial temporal upscaling component of FSR to make it so that, one, the frame generation can be used with any form of anti-aliasing or no anti-aliasing or upscaling. So that means you could use FSR 3 frame gen with DLSS, for example. And the 3.1 spatial temporal upscaler is going to apparently see improvements according to AMD. And I have only had it for just like an hour, and I've loaded up Horizon Forbidden West, and I wanted to compare it to my legacy recordings. I'm having a bit of trouble getting those legacy recordings off a hard drive at the moment, so I only have access to this that you're seeing right here, and that's a comparison, a still image comparison right now of Aloy swinging her baton, or I don't know, her pointy stick, and you can see that in movement. This was the image that I used for my XESS 1.3 video. This FSR 2.2 versus FSR 3.1. I think the primary difference you'll see is that the internal structure, like the internal details of Aloy, have less of a pixelated look to them. But if you still look at them in comparison to the left image of FSR 2.2, you'll still see that like the edges are aliased, and it does have like this kind of crunchy look to it. It just has a less raw internal look to those pixels. And I think that is really obvious when you put it like this image shows here of FSR 2.2 next to 3.1. And then that's next to the XMX version of XESS 1.3. And that is next to the DLSS 3.7. These are all in 1440p balance mode, by the way, or the equivalent, proper equivalent for XeSS with the right internal resolution. I'm not, it's really annoying, but that's the way it is.
That was annoying, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Let's face facts.
It is annoying, but I have to make sure the labels are right there. Either way, here you'll be seeing essentially that if you put them all next to each other, you still actually see that same hierarchy that I showed off before, mainly because XeSS and DLSS do attempt anti-aliasing on moving pixels, and they do a pretty darn good job of it. Like you can really see that in the hair or on the edge of like any of the objects. They have a different look to them due to stylization that partially occurs as a result of the AI, but they also do anti-aliasing at the same time. So I still think with this update to 3.1, at least in this first little testing I have of side-by-side images, it is still very close to what we saw in FSR 2.2. And the main thing that this comparison here is trying to show is that when objects move with FSR in general, that they kind of get like a pixelated look to them and they lack anti-aliasing. And that's one of the more distracting image quality issues with FSR. So it is really similar in that aspect. It's not actually really so different, but there are other aspects of FSR 2s that have issues, like the way it handles particles. Specifically, I'm going to look at like disocclusion. I'm going to look at more things in motion, different types of motion. And hopefully I'll be able to make a video to see whether or not those things look dramatically different.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think we'd all like to see that. I mean, I did have a quick go on it this morning, and this is a really subjective take, but, you know, I think this image kind of demonstrates that the hierarchy of upscaling remains as it was, but there is a qualitative bump to FSR now, which is welcome. But, you know, I played 2 versions of Ratchet and Clank 4K with FSR 2 quality, which always looked, you know, okay, and it still does. Go down to 1440p balanced, which is what you've done here. And yeah, it starts to look a little crunchy, as you say, a little pixelated. And if you just switch on a NVIDIA card to a DLSS balanced, that just goes away.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not, you know, it's quite interesting that the sort of reaction to your tweet, Alex, is it's like, okay, here comes the pixel zooming, but, you know, it's definitely visible, and I think people realise that with the existing version of FSR2, and this is kind of more of an iterative improvement.
Yeah,
I think that's my take on it. I don't really think there's too much more we can say about it right now, because it literally arrived like sort of end of play Thursday. We filmed a direct on Friday, and here we are with just very, very early first impressions. But it's good to see that there are improvements, obviously, because, you know, it is the most widespread upscaler that's accessible to a lot of people. But yeah, interesting stuff. I'm also curious to see whether the FSR 3 frame generation that allows for input from anywhere actually extends to other games, because obviously we've already seen this in Ghost of Tsushima before the update.
Right.
So I'm curious if this is actually a feature that's inherent to FSR 3 frame generation, or if it's something different that's inherent to what Nixxes have done with their implementation of it.
Right.
Because that's kind of like the combination that as an NVIDIA Turing or Ampere owner you would want to see, right? DLSS with FSR 3 frame gen. Because obviously DLSS 3 frame gen isn't available on those older cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just some things about my video. Let's really all pray that I can save these files that I have on my hard drive. I've lifted one video so far, but it happened to be the wrong video. So that annoyed me to a great degree. I was like, I scrolled through it. I was like, this is not the right video. And the other ones are currently not loading. So we'll hope and pray there. But one thing about my video, like all videos covering, image reconstruction on Digital Foundry, where there's a zoom, just to let it out there. The reason why I zoom is not because you look at a game zoomed in. It's for didactic reasons of showing what the difference is, usually for someone on a small screen, aka a phone, which is a huge part of our audience are watching our videos on phones.
50%.
Yeah. And I think the whole point is that I'm not just doing a generic test case where I say, oh, after the fact, I'm zooming in to tell you what's up. No, what I'm doing is I'm finding an area where I literally see differences with my normal eyes, and then showing just normal. I'm watching and playing a game, and then I record it That's the whole point.
Because otherwise, I would just your abnormal eyes.
Then I bring out the abnormal eyes, and no. But so that's all didactic stuff. And I'm curious to see if other things are different. Really, with the particles thing, because that's like a very consistent thing across all games with FSR 2. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, it applies to like vegetation and water and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, other semi-transparent, alpha tested, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay. John, you didn't really have a chance to look at this, did you?
I have nothing to say on this because I have not seen it in action.
Looking forward to your video there then, Alex. Mm-hmm. What can I say?
I am too.
It's probably going to be a bit more exciting than Auto SR on the Snapdragon X Elite, which is kind of looks to be just a pretty simple post-process thing at the moment. Spoilers, but we might have a discussion about that next week. Let's see. Okay, well, that's FSR 3.1. Very, very early reactions there. Let's crack on with our next news topic. Okay, so this one's quite interesting. This week, Capcom released a very short, and I mean very short, teaser trailer for a brand new remaster for the classic Dead Rising. John, I remember playing this back in the day on Xbox 360. It was absolutely brilliant for the time. It was one of those games where I thought, wow, is this what this machine can do? Because this is looking really, really impressive. It's since been remastered again, and now they're doing another one. Any thoughts on this? Because there's not really that much on display in this trailer, is there?
Yeah, I guess so. You're right. This was an important game when it launched. It was the first game to ship with on MT framework from Capcom, which was their brand new at the time engine. This and Lost Planet were the two big showcases on 360. And yeah, this showed off those gigantic crowds and all kinds of stuff like that. It was a pretty sweet looking game. Absolutely. Not to mention really nice motion blur.
Right.
And then, yeah, they brought that back in 2016. But this one, I want to start by saying, I think, Alex, you and I agreed on this, that calling it Deluxe Remaster feels kind of like a mistake in the sense that this does not seem to be a remaster. It seems like they've completely rebuilt all the assets to create something that's visually new. It looks completely different. So in a sense, to me, this looks more like it's in line with, say, Blue Point's work on Demon Souls or something. I don't think it looks that good, but it's like where they've actually rebuilt all the assets. It's completely new, looking completely fresh. Metroid Prime Remastered was also like this, which again, they called it remastered, but I feel like this lack of a standardization on such terms just causes confusion. Right. Because if redoing all the assets is considered remastered,
oh my goodness,
then what the heck is just like an up-res game where it's like the same graphics and you can just run in a higher res? What would you even call that?
I have no idea.
Like, it's so like the whole terminology is just messed up. Maybe that's why they call it Deluxe Remaster.
There is the argument that when Capcom remakes a game, they're not just remaking the visuals, they're remaking the actual game.
Correct.
So, like,
and I agree. But this is still a step up from what you might think of as a remaster in terms of film. So it occupies a weird space that's not really been defined by a specific term. There's no real umbrella term for this. But hey, so given that, I guess they can call it whatever the heck they want, but that's the point is that it looks quite different. And in fact, Frank West himself, he looks really different, I would say. Like in the original, he's kind of this schlubby looking dude that just kind of, he just does his thing. And this, he looks a bit more, it almost looks more cartoony at a glance, but like more exaggerated features. They really went all out with his look.
Well, isn't it the case that Dead Rising kind of became a bit more comedic with subsequent series entries, and maybe they're trying to recapture the original gameplay with this new, sense of...
Yeah, I'm actually wondering about that too, because you're right, the series became more silly, and also Dead Rising 1 was the only one developed by a Japanese team.
Yeah.
And 2 through 4 were all done elsewhere. I think it was a Canadian team, maybe? I can't recall exactly. It was North America, I believe. It worked on it primarily. So this is kind of an interesting chance to go back to it. And it's also territory that Capcom's not really explored before, because like you say, Rich, they usually do when they bring back a game as a quote unquote remake, they completely redo it from the ground up and it's like a completely new experience. They either do that or they just release it again, which, by the way, happened this week with Resident Evil 1 on the PC.
What a surprise!
Which turned out to be the old PC version of that game with like a wrapper around it, and frankly, it does not seem very good based on first impressions either. This occupies that middle ground we were just talking about. So, I mean, I'm all for it though. I'm happy to see it. Dead Rising was cool. I hope mechanically it's polished up a bit, because it's a little bit rough by today's standards, I would say. They were still figuring things out with how to do third-person sort of 3D action game with this sort of weird zombie mechanics. And I have not played this in so long. I'm curious to know how it goes. I just hope they include a standard definition CRT filter that makes the text unreadable.
Like,
To pour one out for the poor suckers that were playing in composite video on a CRT. I already had a plasma at that point, so I got my first plasma just before this came out, actually. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm rolling.
You were set.
But that first plasma, though, actually, no, it was my second plasma, because I bought 2 plasmas that year. First, I got a Toshiba, and then I got a Pioneer in the summer and gave the Toshiba to a friend, because I was just like that. But that first Pioneer, it was still the era of plasmas that had potential for image retention and burn-in.
Right.
And I remember the Dead Rising, there's little meters that fill on the side to show how much time you have left. Like, I started to see remnants of that on my brand new plasma, and I was like, oh no. But thankfully, they fixed that long term, and I still have my last Pioneer plasma downstairs. Still works. No burn-in.
Nice.
But yeah, that's enough rambling from me. I don't know. You guys excited to play this?
Yeah, I'm curious, like, if the time mechanic is going to stay to the same degree it was. Maybe because they're calling it a remaster, it will, like Rich was implying, that the gameplay is going to be much the same. I think this is a game, yeah, like John said, it just has a lot of the awkwardness of some of the third-person camera stuff that, like, we still hadn't reached, like, Gears of War camera fluidity to a degree in a lot of games. And I think this and a lot of other third-person games at the time don't feel super smooth always. As a result, with the camera, at least, the character movement is a different thing altogether. But like the cameras, I'm curious of like how much modernization is going to occur there. So you were joking about how the first game is supposed to be kind of scary. I definitely remember it being a little bit goofy too, like very goofy.
It was goofy too, but
it was pretty goofy, especially the whole shopping mall thing. But yeah, I would like to see this for sure. I'm just once again, like with the new RE engine stuff, I'm curious to see what tech they're gonna push in it. Like with Dragon's Dogma, they had RTGI. Will this do that? The game has like a time of day that might be moving. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
But you're quite right about the developer, John. It's Capcom Vancouver for Dead Rising 3 and 4, and I believe that was Blue Castle Games who did Dead Rising 2. So I think that might make sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know who's doing this quote unquote deluxe remaster?
We don't, but I'm unaware of anything happening to Capcom Vancouver. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I also don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head.
The thing I'm wondering though is like, what technology is this going to use?
Yeah.
Because like, if it's Capcom Vancouver, I don't think there's any like non-Japanese developed RE engine games that have been made to date.
Okay.
They kept that fully in-house. MT Framework was the same, I believe. We also kind of see that MT Framework doesn't really extend to modern platforms very well, as we discussed last time, where there's not really a PS5 or Xbox Series version of MT Framework that exists. So it is likely built in a different engine. It's just a matter of which one. It could even be, if it turns out to be Capcom Vancouver or whatever they're called now, maybe it's their own tech again. Hard to say.
Well, while we're on the subject of remasters / remakes, there was a kind of low-key announcement from Ubisoft this week that they're going to be remaking the older Assassin's Creed entries, which I'm kind of excited about. Sorry, Alex.
Wait.
Yeah.
I'm doing the thing you shouldn't do during a podcast, but in like Google stuff, but it's at least sounding like, from what I can see, is it looks like it's being done in the RE engine.
Okay.
Okay.
Which suggests that this might still be, might be internal then. I'm not sure who's going to do it yet. We'll have to see. Maybe it's the guys that worked on the Resident Evil 3 remake.
This is true. They've been dormant, I guess,
that
for a while.
MTWO, like that could be a good shot. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Either way, interested.
With regards to Assassin's Creed, I mean, the first game is, I think, interesting, and it's before the series really went off the deep end to a certain degree. So I would like to see that, but that's another question of where I would wonder a little bit what the exact purpose of it is, because I think it almost, to me, just to be cynical, they have all these assets they made for Mirage, for example, that they could probably reuse to remake Assassin's Creed 1, and maybe even, what's the one that takes place in Istanbul? Is it the third one?
Brotherhood.
Brotherhood is maybe
or Revelations, one of the two.
I always forget, but they have, like, not to be really cynical about this, but I think asset reuse is a big part of like modern AAA gaming, and I think they probably made a lot of stuff from Mirage that they can just end up reusing for a remake of the original Assassin's Creed, at least. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see once again.
I think it is Revelations, by the way.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to see a remake of the first one, because they hadn't quite figured out the gameplay at that point. It's very, very repetitive, but the locations are just beautiful. But, you know, there is always that Ezio trilogy, and people love Ezio, right? But obviously we're all in on a Unity remake, which we'd like to see. Probably not going to happen, though.
I honestly don't even care about remaking any of these games. They're all so long and crazy, and it's like, who cares at this point? Just make something.
The older ones were something
new, but no, I liked some of the older ones, especially Assassin's Creed 2. It's like, I think that's the one that I actually finished 100%.
Oh, really?
That one was really cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about Assassin's Creed anymore. I really feel they need to take a serious left turn with the series, do something new and unexpected. And I think that would capture a lot of people's imaginations again, because the themes, the ideas are still really cool.
Yeah.
I've always maintained that somehow doing something a bit more modern day, like not Watch Dogs, but like, I don't know, maybe explore that future. I don't know if anybody actually wants that, but that whole future world that Abstergo takes place in, that they were so big on in the original and such, like, I don't know, there's potential there for something interesting.
Potential.
Okay.
Maybe do it from reverse, where like those not flashback, but those sequences
flash forwards
it's flash forwards where it takes place in the past. Like, imagine like Ezio or something, like, we found this ancient crazy device and we're gonna put this thing on, and now we're in like the ancient animus and we can see into the future.
Do it. Why not?
Okay.
It's just as BS as the original story, so why not?
I'm getting very confused at this point. Probably best we move on.
It's a true Assassin's Creed moment then.
Next news story. This one's quite interesting. It kind of came out of nowhere, but Dragon's Dogma 2 has received another patch, a potentially game-changing one. We've got Oliver working on a full video for it, because we're quietly excited about this one. Going to offer up some very early first impressions, separate and distinct from what Oliver's doing. John, you've played it on PlayStation 5, and did I hear you correctly? You now think it's playable?
Correct. I tried to play this game earlier in this year because it was very interesting to me, but I found it unplayable.
Right.
Frankly, I think the way that it looked in motion was bad. It was 60 hertz output. PS5's VRR being limited to what it is meant you either got a very unstable frame rate, which looks juddery and not good, or you got a 30 FPS cap that they patched in that was completely broken, and the game just looked terrible in motion. So I never actually really played it. I played the intro, I got into the open world, and I'm just like, I don't want to play this. This feels bad to play. The PC version was also, from what I understand, not great, and I didn't really want to like fumble around and just keep buying different versions. So thankfully, finally, I probably should have just gotten it on Xbox originally, to be honest, because I suspect that was fine with the way VRR works there, because the problem here was that PS5's 60 hertz VRR is limited to a minimum of floor of 48 frames per second, right? With 120 hertz, if you implement it right, you actually get that low frame rate compensation. Xbox also has a limitation on 60 hertz output, by the way, where it's like, I think it's below 40. where if you go below 40, you get judder as well. So you need to use 120 hertz output. You can really see that in something like Elden Ring. But here, now, on PS5, you flip on the 120 hertz toggle, it switches over to the display, and now you can use either the 30 FPS cap or just leave it unlocked, and both of them look so much better.
Okay.
Like, yeah, the frame rate's still not especially high, but it now looks evenly paced and smooth and fluid and correct to the eye. And as a result, the game just looks better to play. And I actually am now intrigued to really start playing the game for the first time, because I never got to really play it because I was so distracted by that unstable performance. And now it's not a problem. So I think that's a fantastic addition here.
Well, it sounds good if you're actually willing to play it now. Maybe you should have got it on Xbox, but that version did have the balked checkerboarding.
Oh, dang, that's right. yeah, that's what I couldn't remember why I went with one over the other, but you're right. There was that checkerboard problem too. Yeah. So they messed up the Xbox version in a different way. I guess Oliver will answer for us whether that's fixed or not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a quick look at the PC version because Capcom is talking about CPU improvements, right? And I think Oliver mentioned that CPU-bound performance on consoles is better. I actually tried it on PC with like my ultra-high-end rig, and I'm talking ultra-high-end here, which is 13900K with like 7,000 megatransfers per second CL34 memory. Yeah, so, you know, I wasn't expecting anything dramatic. My results are actually quite interesting though, because if you look at the average frame rate, there's just something like a 3% improvement, which, you know, no great shakes, right? But actually, when you look at the footage side by side and see what is actually changing in the moment, a lot of the stuttering has actually been significantly reduced. So it should be a noticeably smoother experience than it was before. Which is quite interesting. Now, I'm going to be very curious to see whether that extends down to lower end CPUs. I think you've got some banked 3600, Ryzen 3600.
Yeah, as long as we can get the
Alex.
path right, it should be especially from launch and patch 1, I believe I've got. So
right, because there was an improvement on patch 1 as well.
Yeah, they already started improving frame times. Like that was like the big issue, and the one reason why it's always hard. Like you can have VRR on a PC and still have a game that looks unsmooth, and same on console too. It just really matters about the differentiation between frame time. So if like one frame is, I don't know, 16.6, and the next one, due to a frame time spike, is 33.3 milliseconds. Even if you had a VRR window that could cover that, like 4K 120 LFC, like John's talking about, it would still look bad because it would still have like a great variation in frame time, which looks like a hitch. And also vice versa, if the frame time hitch is too large, it actually just becomes VSync anyway. So it doesn't really matter. But the whole point is that if you have less variation, like what Rich is just talking about right now with his footage of the 13900K, then it becomes much more viable to make it a VRR experience. That is good. And I mean, that was kind of my big issue with the original release, is I said, like, hey, if you're in the countryside, the game's pretty fine, but as soon as you go anywhere near NPCs, the frame times go really bad, and they make the experience feel really poor. And if this is the thing that they fixed most, then that's great. Because I think having a variable frame rate is fine as long as the frame times are more consistent. Yeah.
Okay. Actually did get some notes through from Oliver. There is changes to settings menu on console. You can select between high and low visual settings. But according to Oliver, it looks like this just changes ray tracing and motion blur. So yeah, not a huge...
Which, by the way, you can't toggle that in-game. You have to go to the main menu because the ray tracing feature requires you to be at the main menu to change it as well. So it's kind of seems kind of pointless.
So you use the 30 FPS cap with VRR, right, John?
Correct.
Yeah, because there's
which is
another
the most stable looking thing.
Okay, because Oliver reckons that it's not great on a fixed refresh rate display. It'd be interesting to see if there's been any improvement there at all.
The 30 FPS cap, it's still broken on a fixed refresh display.
Okay.
I can confirm.
Okay, so we're going to have much more on that, but that's just early impressions. And John is actually able to play it now on a console, which is good news.
Yeah, heck yeah. I think the HDR slider's still busted though, annoyingly. Because the HDR works, but like the peak brightness setting on it doesn't actually seem to do anything.
Is it one of those games that artificially limits itself to 1000 nits?
Well, even if it did, the slider should still do something, right?
You'd hope. Yeah, you're right.
And it doesn't. It changes the option in the menu, but the actual game, the light output remains the same. So, I mean, it still looks good in HDR, but it feels like it could look even better, and the settings just don't seem to work right.
Oh, damn.
Anything more to add? I think we're done on that, right?
Nope.
Okay, let's crack on. The next news story of the week. Now, this one's quite interesting because, first of all, there was the publication of a patent that actually showed us Xbox's streaming box, codenamed Keystone, in a lot more detail than we've seen it in the past, which basically amounted to a kind of out of focus look at the machine that sat on Phil Spencer's shelf in the background. So yes, this patent actually showed us what this particular Xbox would actually look like in a bit more detail. I believe it was cancelled because they couldn't get the price point down to something acceptable. I believe the target was something like $99. This has actually happened at pretty much the same time that Xbox has announced that Game Pass streaming is coming to Amazon Fire Stick and various Amazon streaming devices. John, I hesitate to ask, but obviously this doesn't particularly excite you in any way, shape, or form. Do you have any reaction to this at all?
Well, firstly, when you say the word Keystone, I'm thinking if you swap those two words around, it would become a great Elder Scrolls name, like the Elder Scrolls 7 Stone Key or something like that. Sounds pretty good. But I don't know. I remain relieved that this Keystone project never really came to fruition, in the sense that its success could have hastened the rise of streaming further. But I'm not even convinced that the rise of streaming is even still going to be a thing anytime soon, because the experience remains largely bad outside of the NVIDIA stuff, which is actually impressive, I would say. I guess the thing I'm wondering about though is it's just the Xbox streaming itself. It's not very good.
The image quality
right? It was never good. So I'm very curious to see what the Amazon Fire Stick result actually produces here. If it's just the same as it's always been, then we have no reason to believe they've expanded their streaming capabilities anytime recently.
Yeah.
I mean, if it just looks like that typical stuff, it's certainly functional. And I guess for something like a Fire Stick, where it's like a multi-use device, maybe that makes more sense. But even the Fire Stick itself, I feel like is becoming an outdated concept, in the sense that smart TVs basically have most of the apps you're ever going to need already built in. I'd have no purpose in owning something to add those functionalities to a TV, because the interface on the TV itself works so well.
I'm looking at Xbox's news post for this. Xbox gaming coming to Amazon Fire TV. Play more games, no console needed, which has rubbed up at some people the wrong way, potentially saying, well, is this some sort of statement about Microsoft's strategy? I guess it really isn't. It's just a concept that they want to put out there, that you can just sample this because you might already have a Amazon Fire TV stick.
I think this does actually fit in with their strategy. I mean, they've reiterated many times that the whole idea is to make Xbox games playable everywhere, right? That's the current strategy as far as we can tell. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense for their strategy. Even if this is not the optimal way to experience it, you know what? For a certain subset of the audience that has a Fire TV stick like this, maybe it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is I guess you have to pair an Xbox controller to the Fire TV stick. And the stick itself seems to be you need a Bluetooth enabled wireless controller, so anyone will do. But that seemed to be the sticking point for the Keystone project that Phil mentioned, where they wanted to hit that $99 to $129 price point, and the controller cost sort of became the prohibitively expensive factor, where it's like if you have to bundle a controller with that device, suddenly selling it for $99 becomes not so feasible.
Yeah, another reason I heard was that it's using an Intel processor, which are never cheap.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah, it was
That's
actually
curious.
x86 in nature. Yeah.
Huh.
Oh,
Interesting, right?
Fundamentally, though, I mean, I just don't. I don't know. I think this is probably the better way to do things, where bring this sort of streaming thing into devices that are already capable of it and allow people to use it that way, for those that want to, rather than trying to sell a standalone box that also does this, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to work on the Fire TV Stick 4K Max, $60, and the TV Stick 4K Non-Max, $50.
Be curious to see it, though. For real, I'm really wondering what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see whether there's going to be any changes at all to the infrastructure side, because at the moment it's 720p that goes out to smartphones and 1080p that goes out to other devices. And at 1080p, it's still quite constricted bitrate. In fact, if you go back to Tom's video that he did back in the day versus the PlayStation 5 streaming, it really isn't looking particularly great there. I mean, the PlayStation streaming is limited to PlayStation, which is a fundamental weakness of the streaming, the use of the streaming concept.
Yeah.
Xbox is looking to do it sort of more widespread, as it were, on more devices, but the 1080p stream isn't really great. And actually turned out that it looks like they've actually moved from using the Series X versions of the games to Series S, virtualizing the Series X silicon. So I'm wondering whether that's going to be the case for this as well. I'm guessing probably so, but I think we'd like to look at it. And it's going to be coming in July, I guess, based on this news post. Do you have any thoughts, Alex?
no, just that I'm happy that there isn't a separate device being sold, kind of like John, because I feel like, not to be mean, but I think it is a little bit e-wasty to drop out another device that, when a lot of televisions, or if there's already these other things that support Bluetooth and hook up to televisions and offer streaming capabilities,
Right.
then might as well hijack that infrastructure that already exists, maybe pay a small licensing fee just to get your service on there. And I think that's smarter in the end, because, I mean, you already have like a lot. I mean, I have a lot of stuff on my desk. I have a lot. If you have a television stand, maybe there's a bunch of stuff there too. I don't know, but I feel like, yeah, just having it be more a part of just a TV, or just like a tiny USB thing sticking out of a TV or HDMI port,
Right.
that seems a lot better.
I guess my issue with going back to the original Keystone is that, putting out a box that costs however much, $130, and you're still getting the same questionable quality from a visual perspective, that would be a profound disappointment for me if I was buying one of these devices, because that is what I would say, I'd still say $100 to $130 is a sizable investment for an Xbox. And when you think of what an Xbox is, you want a certain level of quality from that. So I don't know whether they can actually turn on 4K streaming or just improve quality generally, just up the bitrate, for example. But I'd have liked to have seen that. And I'm curious what they're going to do here, because they're actually rolling out the Xbox app in fact, it's available on a lot of smart TVs now. But I'm not sure that the actual quality of the service has improved to match, the sort of expectations you'd have for what a gameplay on a massive living room screen. But it is, obviously a big deal, and I think we should check it out. Okay, so we've got a couple of news stories left on the docket here, which seemingly are just designed to enrage John.
What?
There's a nice one.
At least.
Yeah.
There's a nice one in here.
This one is kind of worrying, inevitable but worrying, I'd say. It was announced this week that Forza Horizon 4 is going to be delisted from digital storefronts. And that is problematic. I mean, in fairness, there is like a massive discounting session going on at the moment with this news. So if you want the game, now's the time to buy it, because it is cheap. But John, there is a clear game preservation problem here, which Microsoft has got to address it somehow, surely. I guess in the case of this one, at least there is a physical disc of Forza Horizon 4 that's available, right?
Correct. So this is... there's two issues to discuss when we talk about this sort of thing. There is a preservation side of thing, and then there's just the ownership ability to buy the game kind of thing, right? Preservation, I think, ultimately really truly rests in the digital realm, specifically on open platforms. So DRM free versions of games that you can access on a PC is really the way to preserve these games in terms of actual preservation, right? The disc side of things, which some have argued is like a preservation thing, and there's elements to it, but in reality, it's more just about ownership and accessibility. So first of all, car games like this, sports games, the delisting of these products is nothing new, right? Since the rise of digital marketplaces, and indeed with discs themselves, there's a point where companies stop selling these games due to licenses contained within. Car games in particular have it rough because they tend to have both music licenses to contend with as well as car licenses. And some of those car licensees, such as Ferrari, from what I understand, they demand a lot of money from the game publishers. And I'm not privy to any of the contract deals here, but obviously there seems to be a limit on how long they're able to sell this without paying more money. I'm not sure to which party specifically, but clearly that's happening. So this is not just like an Xbox thing. This can happen everywhere. And right now, you know, in the case of Forza Horizon 4, you can still purchase a disc. And a friend of mine actually recently got an Xbox, who hasn't had an Xbox in like over 10 years, actually just bought this game and is enjoying it. So the point here is that with the existence of discs, even when a game is delisted, you can still track down said disc and enjoy the game. They're not going to take away ownership from you, like of the digital good. You can still download it if you bought it there. But I guess the thing here is that if you're a latecomer to a system, you suddenly discover one of these games, you can still go get that disc and play it. So to me, this just raises the caution flag about long-term availability to people that might want to just purchase these games. If we were to move eventually, and I think we will eventually, to an all digital sort of model for consoles, Xbox is clearly stepping in that direction first. I'd imagine Sony would like to get there eventually. Nintendo, I think, will continue to cling on to physical media for multiple reasons. But if we were in a situation where a game like this comes out, it's an all digital machine, and then it's delisted, essentially that would become sort of a lost media situation, right? Where, let's say somebody younger that decided, 6 years after the game came out, either they didn't have a chance to, they weren't aware of it, they didn't have the console at the time, and they say, oh man, I want to get my hands on this game. Something that all of us retro gamers tend to do, stuff that we may have missed out on back in the day. It's very common to suddenly discover a game or think like, oh man, I'm going to go pick up a copy of that. And you're still able to do that. Even though it's secondhand, you can still do it. Without discs or any sort of physical media, suddenly that becomes very, very difficult. Now, if there's a PC version and that PC version has been successfully pirated, then there's no issue in terms of accessing it. But for those just want the console experience, just want to own it on a console, a digital only future would mean when the game is delisted, you cannot buy it anymore. And we've seen this before. Nintendo is absolutely guilty of this with their digital only releases, right? When they shut down some of their older eShops, games just disappeared forever in terms of official availability. And the only way to get them, if you didn't buy them back in the day and already have them installed, is to pirate them. So, but Xbox is in a weird situation because Xbox consoles themselves have largely, the newer ones have been immune to piracy from what I understand. Isn't that right? Like they've not really been cracked open.
Well, they have now.
Have they?
Yeah, there was a recent exploit for Xbox consoles, pretty much all of them, all of the current ones.
Oh,
Xbox
no way,
One,
That's
really?
a great
Series.
thing.
That's actually awesome. Great news and very timely.
I'm not sure that much is going to come of it. It's a certain dashboard revision, but it's been patched now. But yeah, maybe something will happen with it. Who knows?
Because really, that's our only hope, right? If for a digital future, we need these machines to get hacked in that sense, because fundamentally, the real problem here just comes down to DRM in the digital space. DRM, locked digital content. You lose access to it. Discs, everybody just says, oh, it's just a license key. But in reality, you can take that disc and use it on any machine you want. You can trade it around. You can sell it. You can resell it. You can use it however the heck you want. you are not locked in the same way as you are with a DRM-enabled digital purchase. You have a lot more freedom there, and unfortunately that's the problem. And I don't see how you solve that so easily, because I mean, these consoles manufacturers aren't just going to say, all right, we're DRM free now. Right? That ain't happening.
The publishers wouldn't ever go with it.
Right. Yeah. They wouldn't go for it. It does happen on PC. We do have places like GOG, of course, still fighting that good fight. But even on Steam, where there is DRM, people are defeating it regularly. So it's kind of a mix of DRM free and piracy on the PC to sort of preserve these games. But just in terms of pure accessibility, that's my big concern here, is like this type of thing, like a game like Forza Horizon 4, it hasn't happened with this one because there is a disc, but it really sucks to think like this could just disappear completely in terms of being able to buy this game, because it's freaking great. And this is exactly the strategy that a lot of these racing games follow. Gran Turismo is similar. It's happened every time with Forza. Basically 4 to 5 years after release, you can expect it's just going to go away. Mm-hmm. You will not be able to purchase it any longer. But even then, even in the case of disc games like Forza Horizon 3, that was where they introduced the awesome Hot Wheels stuff, and that was DLC, right?
Yeah.
If you can't buy the DLC, then you kind of lose access to that, even if you own the disc.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Which also sucks. So it's kind of a weird situation right now, and I'm not happy to see this happening to people. And I only bring it up again. I know some people get very annoyed when we mention this stuff. But it's just, I'm flagging this for those that actually do care, and just long-term availability. And it's a good thing if companies can find a way to solve this somehow.
Right. What sort of potential solutions do you think there are?
I just don't know. Because DRM free is not possible on a console. They could theoretically, maybe they could strike a deal with these companies, like after so many years, the game goes free. But that would also cause problems. And I don't know what you do about this on a console right now.
Mm-hmm. It's a tricky one.
Make it like, I don't know, like a Game Pass game or something, like right before it goes out, so everyone can download it. I have no idea.
Yeah, but then it would go off the Game Pass service anyway.
Yeah, I know. Delisted. Yeah, I have no idea. I have really no idea.
It's going to come down to cracks on the PC side, isn't it?
It's like we had stuff like the Outrun 2 HD version that came out on the PS3 generation. When that disappeared, it was just gone. You can't get it. It's over. There's a bunch of digital games from that era that officially are just gone, and the only way to get them was to hack your system and get the pirated copies. That kind of sucks. It'd be nice to just be able to buy them, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's not a new problem, but it's a problem that's becoming more of an issue over time if discs go away, because then everything will have the problem that digital only games have had in the past, where they can just disappear forever in terms of purchasability.
Not great. But I'm not seeing a solution here short of getting the cracked PC version.
That kind of is the solution, right? Right now. And I don't think there's really, what can we propose to them to do?
I don't know.
Because the real solution, they'd have to open up their machines in a way that I don't think any of them would be comfortable to do, and none of the publishers would be on board with that.
Yeah, I think it's the digital future that's the concern, right? Because at that point there will be no discs. I mean, Forza Horizon 5 hasn't really got anything on the disc anyway, but it can be used as a key to access the online downloads.
Exactly.
Doesn't address the DLC issue though, and I think the best solution for now, at least, is those kind of Game of the Year editions where you just can actually have access to a disc that does actually have the game on it and has the DLC.
Yeah, and then on top of that, I'm just looking right here. I just brought up the German site, but the standard edition of Forza Horizon 4 is listed on sale for €57 digitally or with Game Pass. And as far as I know, my buddy found a disc copy for $10 or $15.
That's expensive
like that.
Sounding. Why is it so expensive?
And obviously companies don't want you to get those details, but getting a secondhand disc version of a game that at that age, it's a lot cheaper as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Okay, I kind of wish we did have solutions to this, but we just don't. It just sucks, right?
Not in our position. What can we do? Just just
Well,
raise the issue, basically.
absolutely. I guess at least on the PC side, Forza Horizon 4 is available for a
Yes.
massive discount at the moment. It seems to be doing extremely well on Steam in terms of concurrent players and whatnot. So yeah, do check that out. I guess
Great game.
It is a great game. Yeah,
Arguably
okay.
better than 5, and I love 5. It's super good.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is an interesting story. Sparse grid supersampling anti-aliasing. It's a thing. It's a thing that's not present in too many games. But John, you do have an interesting story to tell on this one.
Yeah, so from what I recall, Alex, this was originally sort of a bug that NVIDIA sort of developed with the way MSAA worked on their cards at the time, but then people kind of figured out like, hey, this is great, and they decided to add it into their driver as an option.
Yeah, tell us what it is before we start talking about the game.
I think I talked about this in a video once.
Did you talk about it? Why don't you explain it then, Alex? You're the king of this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the way you do super sampling usually, and the way it was done historically, was on an ordered grid. So the pixels and the subpixels would be aligned into smaller boxes, essentially. And the center point of those boxes would be the pixel location. And so when you would have things internally at a really high res and below, squeeze them down into a lower res to downsample or super sample them, you would get a much cleaner image, of course, but at the cost of certain types of edges being much harder to get better anti-aliasing on because they don't align well with the ordered grid. Sparse grid has like different pattern to the internal dot center of the pixel. It's not actually at the center anymore, but it's arranged differently. There's different variations of it. And that gives you greater anti-aliasing. And you can use modified MSAA to do this. You can use those positions. And that's why it fell out of favor. So you didn't see it. I mean, post DX9, there were some DX10 and DX11 titles it worked in, but it was really, really rare. And the only slight downside of SGSSAA is that it, since it is using MSAA positions, it can lead to a slight softening of the image.
It does.
But it's good looking, and you can also adjust things like bit bias to make it much sharper. There you go.
Precisely. Okay. Exactly. And it is basically a form of transparency, super sampling, multi-sampling as well. So things like transparent edges are actually covered by this, which is one of the things that normal MSA does not do. So it looked awesome. But back in the day, if you recall, Alex, you would usually have to go into the NVIDIA, whatever that,
it was not the enhancer. Are you talking
enhancer?
About?
Yeah. And basically include an anti-aliasing compatibility bit in there. That's what I remember from the 12 or so years ago when I was using this a lot. Mm-hmm. But then obviously as MSA went away, this kind of became an impossible thing. But now, after all these years, it's back. And it's actually back in an official capacity for the first time ever, as far as we can tell. There is a new game coming out, moderately new, to the PC that officially supports SGSA in the game options menu itself, which again, I don't think this has ever existed. And it's part of Falcom's Kiseki series, the Trails series. And it's Trails Through Daybreak, which originally came out in 2021 in Japan. And I think now it's getting the Switch and Windows release just now in July. But the studio behind this PC port, it would seem, or at least a part of it, is PH3 Games, which was founded in part by Durante, if you remember him from Dark Souls, the DS Fix days. Yeah. He was the mastermind that continued to show, dare I say, incompetent porting studios what a PC port should be. Gosh darn it.
Yes.
And his work...
The dark days.
Yeah, the dark days. Yeah.
His work helped out so many people for so long, and really, really, I could not have played Dark Souls on PC without this. It made such a difference. And they've been working a lot with Falcom on games, and this is obviously their latest one. And this isn't, the Falcom's engine used for these games, especially this one. It's a bit older, but it's got a very clean, simple style that is, I would still say, attractive to behold. And as a result, what you end up with is like a really slick looking version of the game. And when you enable SGSSAA, you basically get like these perfect, super sampled looking edges everywhere without any sort of the temporal anti-aliasing artifacts or anything like that. It's just like perfect image quality, I would say. You really don't get much better than this. It's about as good looking as you could ever hope for. And it's awesome in that sense. And I think the fact that this has been included officially by itself is something worth mentioning here today, because it highlights just how well done. And that's not on top of everything else. The port itself, it runs fantastically well. Again, it's an older game, but you can't always take that for granted with PC ports, right? Like sometimes there's weird issues with ports, even if it seems like it should run well. This one does seem to be very optimized. It just works beautifully. It's very smooth, has a very robust options menu, including SGSSAA. I was also pleased that it allows you to switch both the voices and the text to the original Japanese as well, which is something that I have lamented the Western releases of some of the Ease games and such that have been put out. They take that out, which sucks if you're somebody that's, I guess it's not like everybody's going to want that, but for those of us that do, it means we would have to get the Japanese version. And in this case, no need. It's here. So all the language stuff is in there as well. And by and large, it just seems like an excellent port with that really cool feature that is really worth highlighting, I think. So congrats to PH3 over there for officially bringing SGSSAA out to consumers in a way that's usable today. I guess the question, I actually didn't think to test this on an AMD card, because traditionally this was an NVIDIA technique, right?
Yeah, it is.
So
I mean, it should work there because if it's done in software. But the one thing I'm curious about is performance, because if you're running 4K and you're running 8K SGSSAA, you're getting into like levels. I mean, what is that? That's 16K or something like that.
Yeah,
I guess
it's crazy
or something. I don't know. I'm bad at orders of magnitude.
This might warrant an actual test then, because I only used it on a high end machine, right? And I cranked it up all the way, and it just runs perfectly without any issues at all. So, but on a lower end machine, what are we going to get? I don't know. It might be worth checking.
1080p. 40p, that might be quite interesting.
I mean, I don't know if you know, is it a DX12 game, Vulcan?
I actually don't know, but I suspect not. Okay. We'll have to ask about that actually. Either way, it's cool. It's cool stuff.
What's stopping it
come out
happening
July
on more
5th,
games? What's happening? What's the problem with doing it on more games? Just the fact that there's MSAA support is just dead. It's
MSAA. MSAA support is dead, right?
Yeah.
Primarily, it doesn't work with modern game engines the way things work anymore.
And the funny thing is, actually, not too long ago, Tim Lotz was posting on Twitter after my anti-aliasing video came out, and he said that there's actually a way in the NVIDIA driver with the original version of Crysis 3 to support SGSSAA, but it requires a DX11 bit that I don't know, and I don't think anyone ever found it because it was probably just internally noted at NVIDIA. So I don't know. Maybe I'll ask him about it again if he responds to messages.
Please reveal the secret bit.
Reveal the secret DX11 bit, the holy bit. Yeah, there are some rare. I'm trying to think of the last game that I saw with MSAA must have been Valorant, the PC release of that game, but I can't think of anything else.
What about Counter-Strike 2?
I think it doesn't actually have.
Wow, MSAA. Interesting. I figured Valve would have kept that around.
I don't think so.
Well, Control has MSAA.
Yeah, that they dropped that though with Alan Wake.
That's true. They got rid of it for Alan Wake 2.
Yeah. It was okay. I mean, it was fine. It was expensive though. Oh, Red Dead Redemption has MSAA.
That has it.
That's
Red
right.
Dead Redemption 2.
Ooh. SGSAA Red Dead Redemption.
Maybe. Doubtful.
Yes. Okay, cool. Good stuff. Check it out. Let's move on. Final news topic of the week, and I'm just going to read what's on the docket here because I find it vaguely amusing. Unity 50 Hertz issue returns again. It returns again in capitals. Actually, just the beginning, but there we are. It needs to stop. John, this is you, isn't it? You've got a rant. You've got a rant building, haven't you?
Oh, I have another rant. Man, this is just a day of rants, it seems. So I've talked about this before on DF Direct and in other videos, and it's been a frustrating thing. Games that ship in Unity, in many cases, ship with what I call it's the tick rate bug. It's not really a bug, though. It's more that the default rate for physics update, the default tick rate in Unity is 50 hertz.
Yeah.
And it remains that way, right? Unfortunately, when you tie the camera to an object that is reliant on physics calculations, the camera itself will appear to update or match the rate of the physics tick rate. So that means, let's say you had a side-scrolling game and the game's updating at 60 FPS, but the character is a rigid body physics object, and that updates at 50 hertz internally, the physics tick rate. Now your camera's going to scroll at what looks like 50 hertz in a 60 hertz container. So the whole thing is juddery looking. It doesn't look
awful.
Smooth, right? It's really bad. We actually saw this recently in Dave the Diver last year.
Right.
Was it last year? I can't remember when it was, but that game,
year.
The whole game has that problem where it just doesn't look smooth. But, I kind of forgot about this for a bit until Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble hit. So for whatever reason, RGG Studios, I think they're the ones that developed this. They don't have this problem on their other games, which have used either the Dragon Engine or Unreal in a couple cases. But the Monkey Ball stuff they're doing in Unity for some reason. And this has that, you instantly see it. Because various people have been raving about this. Oh, dude, this is a really cool Monkey Ball game. You got to check it out. So I was actually stoked for it. But then it turns out, as soon as you start to play it, it's like, oh, this doesn't look smooth at all. And if you actually go frame by frame, you'll see out of every 6 frames, there's 1 frame where it just doesn't update the movement of the camera and the ball and everything. So the whole game ends up looking, it just doesn't look as smooth as it should, which is nuts. And it really, for a game like this that demands such precision, it should be so fluid for a series that started life on the GameCube running at a flawless 60 frames per second. Well, actually, I guess it started on the Naomi board in the arcades and then went to GameCube. I just think that's unacceptable here. And there's really 2 fixes. So the one I've implemented myself that actually does work, but requires a little bit more grunt, is that you simply change the tick rate to 60 hertz instead of 50. But when you're on the Switch, I do understand. Sometimes
it's Monkey Ball.
Yeah, we're not talking Alan Wake 2 here.
I know. I'm just saying. So that's one way. But then Unity itself, and this is when I spoke with Unity about this in the past, they were like, they raised that concern about the frame time issues and, the demands of that. But they have interpolation as an option that they suggested should be like the default option. But clearly some developers still haven't gotten the memo, and they're using neither interpolation or a higher tick rate for the physics. And when you're on something like, this also affected, you remember the Final Fantasy the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters?
Oh yeah.
Those had the same freaking problem where like the scrolling, these were games designed for like 8 and 16-bit systems to look super smooth, 60 FPS when you scroll. They were limited by the same freaking problem. So the camera movement of just walking around the overworld in these 2D pixel art games is not smooth at all. Unless you did a PC hack, I guess.
Yeah.
But on the console versions, there's nothing you can do. It just looks bad in motion. So developers, if you're watching this and you're using Unity, please pay attention to this setting. Either see if you have the headroom to bump up the physics tick rate, or probably even better, just in terms of simplicity, like try to use interpolation of some sort here. Unity does support this. And it can make a big difference, because right now we have this awesome looking Monkey Ball game that is still perfectly playable, mind you, but it just doesn't look as smooth as it should. And it looks significantly less smooth than the original games, which I don't know, Alex, is it unfair to ask for them to match that?
No, it's not at all. And I also just want to say, like, I always feel like this one should be that one that just like your eyes, when you're watching something, you should really be seeing it, especially if like there's any camera control in a game. And I think it's a big oversight on the development side to not notice it. But another thing that I want to mention, other than like what John said about like a hack or something like that, another, I guess, user hack for this could be to run your game at run your monitor at 50 hertz. Like John used to do this.
Yeah.
John used to do this in his 4K on a budget videos, right?
You can do that. I did that back in the day. Yeah, it's a plausible hack, right? Because before the days of variable refresh rate, displays did support 50 hertz, which basically reduces your GPU requirement by like whatever, 5/6. Sorry, 1/6. But so yeah, you see what I'm saying there. Yeah,
that's a good hack. Also 100 hertz, or if you have a VR monitor on PC, limiting it with like RTSS and or Special K to 50 FPS, and then just playing the game.
Yeah,
but all stuff you shouldn't have to do.
Exactly, yeah. Especially when it's a game like Monkey Ball, which is about physics and, it's all about the movement of the ball.
And a game like this is not available on anything but Switch.
Right,
So you can't use the PC.
Oh, is it really? That's so bad.
Switch only, so it's tied to this. Not only that, you can actually see that during the level flyovers, when the camera's not attached to the monkey ball, it actually looks totally smooth. It's like beautiful smooth 60. But as soon as you attach to the physics-driven object, the monkey ball, you get that judder. So, that's the telltale sign when you disconnect the camera from a physics object and it looks totally smooth, but then you connect it to that and then it's not, then it's 100%. That's the issue. It's not, I can guarantee this could be fixed relatively easily.
Well, surely the way forward is for Unity to tick the interpolation box or the 60 hertz box.
Yeah, I know, or at least somehow communicate this better to the developers. I don't know what's going on. I just don't understand how people aren't seeing this in development. Like, it's just so obvious to the eye when you see it moving. Like, this doesn't look as smooth as it should.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Bring me in, I'll fix it.
Yeah, John will literally fix it for you.
Somebody gave me access to a shipped game that had this problem, and I opened up the project, and, we kind of went through that, and it actually fixed it. It was exactly what I thought it was.
How long did the fix take?
Getting Unity set up so I could open the project took a bit of time, and once it was there and working, it was just like less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, this is a great segue to our first couple questions, probably.
Okay, well, it's always a bit of a bummer to end the news section on a bummer, but there it is, because we don't generally like to to sort of criticize.
We just want that fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it is what we like to call low-hanging fruit, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The lowest.
Really, the
in this case, it's bananas, even.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, that's the end of the news. And I guess at this point we should move on to supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week on our Patreon we put up a call for questions, and we usually get a big bunch of questions. We choose the best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer and can fit in the available time. And here they are. We're going to start off, actually, wow, we got a series of questions here. All comes in terms of reaction to the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Erdtree content that we put out this week, which essentially was making the case that From Software's had well over 2 years to address the technical issues in Elden Ring, and barely any of them appear to have been addressed since the launch period. This question from Aliasing Anonymous. We've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to try and go through them as quickly as possible, but you'll get the point. Do you have any theories for why technical shortcomings seem to factor so little into most reviews? Sadly, I wasn't at all surprised to read reviews on PC-centric site for Dragon's Dogma 2 and Erdtree with nary a mention of performance issues. This is a technical medium. Can anyone imagine film critics not mentioning that the new Star Wars film stutters whenever a character activates a lightsaber or walks to a new environment? I think that's the point I've made in the past.
Yeah, it's one of the better ones. Yeah.
We ought to simulate it. That'd be awesome. Can you imagine that?
I think it is our next
that's
April 1st video is Star Wars, like the George Lucas collection on PC.
Yeah,
And we
the
just
Star
do like,
Wars
we just go
struggle.
nuts. We just go nuts with this video.
Going back to aliasing Anonymous, it's one thing to say these issues won't affect the score, but to not even write about them strikes me as a big disservice to readers. I'm left wondering whether reviewing games renders many immune to most issues, since one Erd3 reviewer said the DLC quote-unquote runs fine for me on an RTX 3070/i5 12600K rig, save for a rare stutter here or there. Thanks to Alex's testing, we know that can't be the case. Do you think technical issues aren't given their due in reviews or review scores? If so, why do you think that's the case? We have a rejoinder here from Lavanda. Hold on a minute. Lavanda Davis. From Software doesn't optimize performance in Elden Ring simply because they don't have to. The main game sold millions and the DLC will probably match it. Thousands of players have played the game to completion and have shown there are no game-stopping bugs. There's no financial, legal, or even ethical reason to fix stuttering or inconsistency in frame rate. That's a big statement there. And speaking of big statements, this one from Wicker. Hey DF team, genuine question and a bit of feedback. I watched your review of the Elden Ring DLC and noticed Alex's critique of From Software's technical performance, where he mentioned that they quote unquote need to stop releasing things of such poor technical quality given how much money they bring in and how much money the product demands. As someone who's been in the industry for years, I have a genuine question here since I'm not aware of your backgrounds. Do you guys have some actual data on how much these kinds of games demand, or know how much it costs to hire and retain skilled technical experts and programmers, especially those proficient in optimizing open world games? Because from my understanding, considering the immense costs associated with polishing and optimizing such games, coupled with the financial struggles, layoffs and studio closures plaguing the industry, From Software seems to be making a sensible decision. By prioritizing gameplay and fun over the technical side of things, they ensure their games remain engaging and unique. I understand that as a technical review team, it's your job to highlight performance issues, but maybe consider toning down the harshness of your negative reviews until at least the industry gets back on its feet. The essence of gaming, after all, is about fun and immersion, and From Software consistently delivers on those fronts. Thank you for your great reviews and analysis. They are invaluable to the community. Have a nice weekend. Cheers. So, Alex, I'm going to go to you there. Which one should we tackle first? Let's tackle the question of the harshness of your critique.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, the thing is, the harshness of a critique for me is always kind of like how endemic the issue is, and also the size of the team and the amount of money that they make, and how much they put in. And also, I guess, the price of the product. A good example is Square Enix releasing Final Fantasy VII Remake on PC and doing really bare minimum stuff there. And I just, I didn't make the video for it, but I kind of was talking with Oliver at the time, and we were just kind of like, this is a full price game that is worse than another version. And we just didn't really see why that had to be the case, based upon, it's not like Square Enix were tiny or something like that. And that's kind of what drives the harshness here, is that there's been a lot of the last 5 years, definitely a lot of response about stuttering in PC games. There's been a lot of response over the last more than a decade now about From Software games about doing certain things differently from the audience. And that's not the entire audience, but it is a good chunk of the audience. It's the reason why Rich can make a video called Bloodborne finally not running poorly, and it gets 600,000 views. You know what I mean? So there's definitely a want for this out there. And I think my harshness comes from the fact that for this game very specifically, there were some really big low-hanging fruit issues, which will tie into a couple of the first questions that we talked about here, that were raised here, that there's just really low-hanging things. So to get at your question, you do not need a John Carmack level $500,000 a year person to fix the issues in Elden Ring on a variety of the platforms. On PC, you can get an above 60 FPS mod that just makes it so that you don't have EAC running as in the ability to play online, but it works flawlessly, according to people who've been playing the entire game that way. So they are not doing something on PC that modders can make work really well. And on the console side of things, once again, you do not need a John Carmack level programmer to do these things. Is running the PS4 version, the PS4 Pro version on PS5 gets you a near locked FPS experience. And that just shows us that the difference in resolution and the slight tweak to certain settings like foliage and maybe shadow resolution are the thing that gets this game running a lot better on console. And these are things that users can do to make the game run better. And the whole point is it shouldn't be the user's job to do this in terms of options available in a game. But when you give out $70 maybe for the first release and $40 for a DLC, they should start offering these things to you, because that's what you should just expect of a product, I think. And yeah, then, okay, the reaction then is if they don't want to offer it, then I won't buy it and I won't recommend it. So my review is going to be from my couched position to be harsh and negative about it. And you obviously don't have to watch my review.
Well, there are some issues here that, in the console versions as well. I mean, on the PC side, there's obviously a lot more potential tweakability that, for some reason, From Software aren't particularly interested in. But even with the locked performance that you do have, it's not working properly. It's not working properly, right? This is a problem. And, that on the console side, we have a dynamic resolution scaler in the quote-unquote frame rate mode that's pretty much always at lower bounds. So therefore, it's not a particularly effective dynamic resolution range that has been selected there, right? I mean, this is sort of, just basic stuff. There's very definitely low-hanging fruit that could be used there. And similarly, well, where do we begin? I mean, there's so much going on here. Do you have anything to add to this question of the critique, John? We can't sit here and say that there's issues with this game, but, it's okay because, obviously it's because of the situation in the industry at the moment. I think it's fair to say that From Software games have always had technical issues, not so much limited to the current era.
I don't think that's fair to say, Rich. If you go back to the PlayStation 2 era,
well, they were way better back then. Yeah, that's way back. Yeah, but yeah,
that's when most of their games were just like, we're just going to run at 60 FPS, and that's that. Not all of them, but a lot of them were like that. But yeah, ever since the HD generation, we'll say, they've always had issues. I guess, yeah. I mean, when it comes to reviewing this kind of stuff and thinking about it, like I understand that some reviewers and such may not catch this kind of thing or care or notice, and thus they can't really subtract, or they can't really create a negative point out of that, right?
I think there's a problem here in that there's such a rich diversity of potential PC components that could go into any given PC. I think maybe one potential explanation here is that reviewers are simply reticent to point out technical issues that they can't explicitly say is limited to their machine.
That's actually a really good point.
This guy with the 12600K might be thinking, well, my CPU is a few generations old. Maybe this doesn't apply to other CPUs.
I think they're afraid to talk about it if they don't really know all the details.
Yeah, or maybe they don't understand the nature of the issue and can't quite quantify it.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly enough, Rich, I remember back in the day, I used to read a lot of PC magazines, and I would always scan for that section towards the end of the review where they would talk in detail about their performance experiences. And even back then, they would test it on like, oh man, this runs pretty good on my Pentium 90, but on the 486, it's pretty choppy, and we need this. It's good. The videos are smooth on a 4X CD-ROM drive, but if you have a 2X, beware. Comments like that, like how much memory you had, like all this stuff was factored in, and that kind of has disappeared, right? And we don't really see that from normal reviewers, and I think it's just, you might be right about this. Like, if they do see a problem, they're unsure.
Because the way to actually, ferret out whether it's an issue or not is to try it on multiple systems, right? Which is,
not everybody has.
Which not everybody has. And I think Alex has got a pretty good system set up here where, you can actually check out a particular issue on two, a mainstream and a high-end rig. And typically you see the same issue, just exaggerated on the lower end system because it's less capable.
But then there's another side of this coin that I thought about, where sometimes you'll see a review where they might give it an especially harsh score based on some experience that they had due to either a weird issue they encountered, or more likely it's like, do you remember? So obviously there was that famous Prey review where Prey got knocked because the reviewer on one site had an issue that most people didn't, and they seemingly were very angry about it and kind of took it out on the game. And I can understand being annoyed by encountering a bug, and the bug should still be mentioned, but I don't think it reflects entirely on the quality of the product. But then there was another one where we were covering a game, and we know the reviewer that was looking at it was playing it on an original Xbox One that also seemed to have some issues on top of everything else.
Right, yeah.
You remember that, Rich? And the game, I won't say the game, but they were having an experience that was noticeably worse than what we were seeing in our testing, even on that same console.
Yeah.
And that was going to influence negatively their review. But it's like, well, it's not really like that. It shouldn't be. Something else is going on here.
Yeah, I can give you a good example of that, actually, John. Back in the day, I looked at Mass Effect 2 on PS3.
Yeah.
And it took like so long to install. I just couldn't believe it. And there seemed to be some streaming issues in game. And my sort of nuclear solution or thing to try was simply to format the hard drive and reinstall it. And it basically drastically reduced the install time. And so this is an example of something that is apparently a fixed platform where the experience should be the same for all users actually being very different because, the hard drive on the PS3 but seemingly had fragmentation issues or something similar to that.
Probably something very similar, yeah.
Yeah.
In this case, to get to that question about it's not reflecting in real reviewers, I think the PC gaming landscape has changed. John's mention of the magazine review is very, very true. That was definitely a thing.
Right.
And and obviously the way we get around that is by having multiple pieces of hardware and then switching out components to figure out which one is the bottleneck, and or having knowledge as to which one is the bottleneck. And I don't think that should be presupposed for everyone, but it would be nice regardless if someone wrote something about it as a little blurb at the end of a review, even if you can say I cannot corroborate it, because at least you give the user an expectation, and then users have like this knowledge. So like with Elden Ring, even if a reviewer didn't have all these PC parts and they encountered some issue, well, it would come out really quickly after release that this was common.
But what if they reviewed it on a console,
etc., right?
Because I mean, he meant the two games he mentioned in the top question with Elden Ring and Dragon's Dogma 2, it had problems on every single platform. Right. The problems were just a little different. And a lot of those reviews, I feel, didn't really take those problems into account at all.
They definitely didn't. No.
So, which is, I mean, if you weren't, that's tricky because I feel like people in the know kind of saw that coming, but like maybe the people that aren't in the know that didn't see it coming and didn't catch it in the reviews, maybe they aren't even bothered by it at all. I don't know.
Well, look, we just talked about Monkey Ball on Switch running at 60 frames per second with 50 hertz tick rate, right?
Yeah.
And obviously the developer didn't notice that. So I think it's perfectly fine that some reviewers aren't going to notice technical issues if the developers of some games aren't noticing drastically wrong problems with their games, right? I just wonder, I think there's a lot of reasons to explain it. And I think, to be fair, there is quite a lot of discussion within the PC press about technical issues. It's just you won't find it on mainstream sites, possibly. You'd probably need to go to other sites, computer-based, whatever, Gamers Nexus even.
That's the thing I like about Alex's type of coverage, though, versus a lot of PC sites where you see like benchmarks and graphs, and you're like, oh, this card's like 3 FPS better here. That stuff is interesting, but it's not that useful in terms of understanding what you're really going to experience. Or the way you break it down, Alex, is like, doesn't matter what hardware you have, or like if you have anything under this, this type of issue can manifest, and here's what it looks like, here's why it's bad. And it really helps you see like, okay, so this isn't just a matter of, my PC can get a few more frames here or not. This is like, this game has a fundamental flaw or some kind of hiccup or something's wrong with it that's causing problems that pretty much manifests everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that.
I think it's very helpful too. And I would love to see that be brought about more through more outlets, or even just in general, like when users are playing the game. I still think the one problem with the Steam forums and with Elden Ring, it came out pretty hardcore with the release of this expansion, this DLC, is that there was negative reviews coming out when the game came out. And it unfortunately got conflated with discussions about difficulty, which is a whole other topic, and one that I have very strong opinions on myself. But at least the thing is, users were immediately noticing that the performance wasn't it wasn't great, and they wanted to talk about it, and that came out in the reviews. And only if there was better wording or ways to mark reviews as being a technical review on Steam, for example, like this is reflective of the technical experiences versus, some random review bomb because a developer said something on Twitter. You know what I mean?
Actually, honestly, Alex, I think that is a fantastic idea where you have like a separate meter, like where every user can, they already do the Steam hardware surveys, but imagine if people were able to weigh in on their performance experiences, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you include the hardware along with it, or maybe not, but like having a separate game review and then here's a review just for my hardware experience would be really useful. Because if you see like a really low score, you can kind of assume that, oh geez, a lot of people are having problems with this game.
So what's an amazing part about Steam is that it has access to DXGI, and it can technically know your entire frame time for your entire gameplay experience. I'm just saying, like, there's ways to like people are like, oh, the game doesn't stutter for me, but then you could see the frame time readouts through DXGI that Steam recorded.
Works on my PC.
Oh, it didn't. No, it didn't. You didn't notice it. But there's ways around this some way. But I think the general experience for me is right now, after Elden Ring and so many other games recently before this, where if you make a lot of money and your game has big issues, I don't understand.
You've said this before, though, but if you look at the console version of Elden Ring, these consoles can run it at 60 frames per second perfectly. We know it because the PS4 version runs like that on a PS5. So it's just a matter of the settings that they've selected mean that it runs worse in the native version, right?
And if you have a quote-unquote frame rate mode, you kind of want a good frame rate.
Yeah. So like they should have made the performance mode, like scale it back, whatever they got to do, scale it down to PS4 level, whatever. It actually should still be able to scale better than that because the PS4 mode has its own limitations.
It's checkerboard and whatnot.
So like, they should be able to get there. Like we know it's possible. The hardware can do it.
Dare I say it, the concept that modders are able to unlock the frame rate and get above 60 frames per second on Elden Ring, and From Software can't/won't do that. I do think that's unacceptable. There's certain things which you just, there are certain criteria that you just demand from a PC game in the modern era, right? Ultra wide support, Elden Ring doesn't do it. Ability to play above 60
you saw it in my video,
second.
I hope.
I forgot about that.
This is the basic stuff, right?
Man.
Come on.
Come on now.
Come on now. Let's tie a bow on that and move on. Okay, this next question actually is, again, two questions. This one from Eric Benoit. Hello, everyone. The PS3 on PS5 rumors are back after a short hiatus.
I like the idea of
the rumors just took a holiday. A couple of weeks in the Caribbean, but they're back. Given the fact that PS2 emulation on the PS5 is underwhelming at best, what could be a reasonable expectation of PS3 emulation on the PS5 or the 5 Pro? Wouldn't it be better to simply re-release some choice PS3 titles with a modest upscale? Or would that be cost prohibitive? Perfect_organism has this. On the recent resurfacing of PS3 emulation on PS5 rumors, Microsoft managed to get decent emulation of Xbox 360 games on the Xbox One VCR. Is the cell processor in the PS3 really that much harder to emulate than the PPC architecture on the Xbox 360? Spoilers, yes.
Yeah.
Given what Microsoft managed on the Xbox One, it feels like PS3 emulation should absolutely be doable on the PS5. I'm sure I've simplified a lot of complexity here, so would be cool to hear your perspective. So I'm going to go to the team shortly on this, but in the background there, right there, just next to the Radeon 7, is a little mini ITX board, which actually has the PlayStation 5 CPU, right? I never did coverage on it because it's a really limited system.
Board.
But the concept I came up with was, hey, let's test out this idea of doing PS3 emulation on a PS5 by using RPCS3. And there are games that work fine. Ridge Racer 5, for example.
7.
So, yeah, Ridge Racer 7. Quite right, John. But the problem is that it's very light on the CPU. So the CPU in the PS5, no problems. However, when it comes to the cell processor, the SPUs are highly custom exotic hardware that don't map particularly well to modern x86 processors. And I think both of you guys have actually tested our PCS3.
Oh, yeah.
And
Plenty.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but whenever there's a title that has heavy SPU usage, then basically performance collapses, even on something like a 12900K. Who wants to go first, John?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think that's actually the key to whether this could be viable for them to pull off. Because obviously, well, first of all, I want to say he mentions the PS2 emulation, and I would say that there's not really a relation there to consider. How the PS2 emulator performs has no bearing on what this would be. And furthermore, the performance of that emulator isn't really the thing that's an issue. It's more the way they present the image, how they do the scaling. So totally separate. If they got this working though, and let's say they find a way to do this faster than you could do it with just like our PCS3 or whatever. I still think they would bottleneck on those SPU heavy titles, but I think there's enough PS3 games out there that could be interesting to release. And we see how limited their PS1 and PS2 library is, that they could still conceivably put PS3 games out on the PS5 and have them be perfectly fine. You just wouldn't be able to do them all. Like, I don't think you could say, I don't see how they could get, say, like Killzone 2, for instance, running well on a PS5 via emulation. I think that would really they'd have a serious problem. And if they did, that'd be amazing, actually. But simpler titles, sure. And in fact, in simpler titles case, they could leverage the GPU to sort of improve things even, right?
Sure.
So you could actually see some nice boost to image quality or some fluidity things, especially, honestly, weirdly enough, the bad PS3 ports might benefit the most because most of those were just using the main core on the cell CPU and really didn't touch the SPUs. They were GPU limited. So in that case, you might actually get better performance.
You actually see a lot of patches for RPCS3 for specific games, and a lot of the way they claw back performance is doing stuff like turning off GPU features that were ported to the SPUs, like motion blur, for example, post-processing.
MLA.
Yeah,
MLA,
all of that. Yeah, that was mega heavy, right? MLA back in the day.
Because that was the whole point, was like developers had to find ways to solve the slow GPU issue on PS3 by offloading the stuff to the SPUs.
Yeah.
So they were doing graphics work on the CPU, which was pretty cool, I have to say. But it's not friendly to modern systems in the way that it works, like at all. So
Negative.
I like your idea of the simpler games being done to, port to PlayStation 5 via emulation, John. The issue is that, of course, pretty much all the Sony first-party games did extensively use the SPUs.
While I agree, I'm not sure that they would necessarily have to release those either. Like, I don't know. Like Uncharted, for instance, like nothing Naughty Dog would get a release. They have no reason to do that because it already exists on PS4, for instance, right?
Right. Uncharted 1, they could possibly do. That wasn't
They wouldn't need to, though, because it has that collection. God of War 3
Resistance,
has a port on PS4.
I think Resistance would be interesting.
Resistance games would be interesting.
Yeah, but fundamentally, you're asking Sony to create a PlayStation 3 emulator for PS5 that wouldn't run most of their games.
Their games, yes, their games.
Unfortunately, yeah. Unless the only way I can really see it is if they're doing this on a game by game basis, they may be able to intercept, edit, do things to the way that whatever those games are calling for, find ways to intercept it and do it a different way. Maybe like they couldn't necessarily have an all-in-one emulator that just plays every game, but they could say like, okay, we're customizing this thing to handle whatever the specific game is trying to do, and sort of rejigger it so that it works within the constraints of what this other hardware is. I mean, you could do like some things with like GPU compute now, for instance, rather than doing it on the SPUs or something. Just there's probably ways to do that. It just, it's going to need more work.
Well, if these rumors have weight, maybe there has been a problem that has been solved.
There could be a breakthrough here. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows?
I mean, within the realm of what a console can do versus what a PC can do, it wasn't the same, unfortunately, on PS3. PS3 had a split RAM pool, but the unified memory of a modern console will give it advantages potentially in emulation when it comes to things that like a PS3 emulator on PC is going to be doing like a lot of CPU readback, and so it'll have something on the GPU being done with the GPU, and it sends it to the CPU for like confirmation, then it's re-uploaded back to the GPU, and there's this round trip latency. And on a console you would all be working on data that is in the same memory pool, so it might not need at least one of the round trips. There are things that could be done, but I would still be heavily skeptical at the moment, just in terms of single core performance, what the PS5 CPU can offer. And I like John's idea, though. I would actually really think it's cool if they had a generic PS3 emulator, even if it was limited to titles. Because if you think about it, Xbox's backwards compatibility project also was limited in the amount of titles it did. It wasn't a technical reason, really. It was a different reason, but
licensing,
it still at least offered something, and that would be great money, or at least great advantage, surplus value to a PS5.
Especially if you look at the original Xbox, the games available. So when they made that available on Xbox One, it was like 2 generations prior.
Yes.
Whereas PS3 would be 2 generations prior here. There's very few original Xbox games supported on the Xbox Series consoles or One in backwards compatibility. Like 360 has hundreds, but original Xbox One, it's like barely anything. But it's still cool that it exists. And the games that are there are nice and they do receive benefits from it. So I feel like that would still be viable enough where they just put a handful of titles that do work.
Right.
That would be cool. Maybe they could convince Namco. I mean, they got Ridge Racers on PSP, right? On emulated on PS5. What if they put out Ridge Racer 7 again? Let people enjoy it. That would be cool. That actually probably would work really well, because even Ridge Racer 7 it's not perfect, but it's playable on a Steam Deck.
Yeah.
If you emulate it, like, again, stress, it's definitely not perfect, but it's close enough where you're like, wow, we're almost there. PS5 could do that easy.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. Next question. And man, this one's going to get clipped by everyone, but let's get straight to it. Hello, DF guys! Exclamation point. I love your weekly videos! Exclamation point. I have a question I've been wanting to ask forever. Another exclamation point.
Sick.
When the Xbox Series X came out, on paper it clearly had more power than the PlayStation 5, but out of the gate it's been outperformed quite often. To be fair, it's kind of, can go one way or the other, right? Originally, it was said that developers had dev kits early and that gave PlayStation 5 an advantage, but it's been years now and it's still trailing! Exclamation point. What's the haps? What's the haps? Surely they should have caught up with how to use the hardware by now. Question mark.
Fire.
Exclamation point. Okay, so yeah, obviously we've been speaking to developers for a while now, because it's a question that we never really had a satisfactory answer to. But I think at this point we do have a satisfactory answer. There have been various sort of theories. There was the development tool theory. There's still the split memory pool. Xbox has a fast memory area and a slow memory area. But we have spoken to developers now. We do have a bit more insight on what's going on. And I think we've got 2 specific instances that we could talk about. John, do you want to go first?
Sure. So one of the big ones that we've heard referenced multiple times now is the shader compiler. Apparently it's just, I forget what it's called, but it's on the PlayStation side. It's just extremely fast and optimized, and it really takes the way it's specific. It gets pretty complex in terms of how it actually, like the wavelets and all that. There's a lot of complex stuff in terms of how it it works, but it makes better use, I guess, of the actual silicon in a way that allows for just speedier performance.
Yes.
And that seems to be a huge thing. And obviously Microsoft wouldn't be sleeping on that. They're clearly putting in the work on that, but so is Sony. And developers just seem to prefer Sony's implementation for this. And I guess along those same lines then as well, the PS5's main API, which I'm forgetting the name. It's not the same.
I always forget the name of the new one now.
It's I can't remember
Is
the
it PSIL or something? Or am I thinking of the shader language is called
ACM? I can't remember.
I can't remember. But that also seems to be quite fast and faster than what Microsoft's doing with DirectX between the Xboxes. Which of course, I think DirectX, in the way it's built, even though it's a different machine, it's still, there's intended to be some commonality there to allow for easier interworkings between a PC and an Xbox.
Yes. 100%.
But it does slightly handicap what the Xbox can do, I would say. And along those lines, though, I had some theories about why some games were still performing better on Xbox in the cases where Xbox did outperform it. And a lot of those titles were cross-generation, and there is a layer that allows you to use the old PS4 style API and like sort of translate that to work on PS5, and that seems to be quite a bit slower than the native PS5 API. So I have to wonder if some games that relied on that perhaps basically suffered versus using the native API, which if you're using the native PS5 API, I would imagine that would make it harder to support PS4 maybe, unless you're running two.
I mean, if you're doing hardware specifics for sure.
Right. So I don't know. That's just some of the details I've heard. If you want to expand on that, Alex, maybe.
Yeah. So another thing is, it depends on what the title's doing. So if a title is, like Unreal Engine 5 titles, we've seen pretty much always an Xbox Series X advantage in terms of resolution. But usually the thing is like, they use things like dynamic resolution. So the differences in resolution are
negligible.
It's really not the way you would, like on PC, I've always said, I would never tell you just to run a game at a slightly higher dynamic resolution. I would say bump up settings or something like that. But that's not the way games are optimized for console. So in Unreal Engine 5 games, typically we see better results on Xbox, but the reason for that is because I think there's a difference in like a lopsidedness for both of the platforms here. Xbox Series X has way more compute units at a lower frequency, and in this case here for Unreal Engine, which in Unreal Engine 5 using software Lumen, almost everything is compute. There's very little actually like straight up rasterization of the traditional sense. Like a lot of triangles are rasterized. You've got shadows which are not done through compute, but most of the lighting is done through compute and things like that. So it pushes everything in the favor of the box that has way more compute than the other box. But in a cross-generation title, for example, which we've also seen a lot of them, or those titles that are built in a way that is not leveraging a lot of compute, which would be probably against the current paradigm of the way game development's running. That'd be a little bit older school. Well, those things on PS5, it has less compute, but the like rasterization units in the hardware are clocked at a higher rate. So they can finish at an earlier time. And, obviously that there's a lot of other confounding scenarios here with regards to asynchronous compute, because technically you would imagine a good developer would be leveraging in those moments when the Xbox Series X is slower in the things that are done with traditional rasterization. So like the shadow map pass could be slower on Xbox Series X. You'd imagine they'd be running more things through asynchronous compute there to kind of make it back. But things are not all equal. To say the least. How much time invested in one machine versus another is very much so dependent upon a lot of projects. So in this case, there are inherent things an engine can do which could make a game faster or slower, regardless of the whole tools thing, which is what John just talked about. And we're kind of going back to tools there but the shader compiler thing is an issue on the Xbox side. And also the fact that you're not addressing the hardware to the same low level as you are on the Xbox side. I'm trying to think there's only kind of
what about ray tracing, Alex? Because wasn't that an issue back in the day? For example, Callisto Protocol having quality shadows.
Well, Callisto, I mean, there's a lot of things. Well, we saw that they improved it a lot after launch. I do think a part of the story that we see on PC all the time is sometimes Xbox is not getting a lot of time in development for things. Even after they fixed it, though, it was lower resolution.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't fully fixed, right?
And one of the things that a double-edged sword with Xbox Series X is that, you can just run DX12 code on it and just straight up port DXR from PC, but that wouldn't give you great advantages that the Xbox hardware can offer you. Like you can, as we've seen in games like Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, which has, I think, a good advantage on Xbox Series X versus PS5, if I'm recalling Tom's review correctly, they actually take advantage of a whole bunch of low-level functions of both of the consoles to make it run as well as it does and look as good as it does. And if you don't use those and you just ran straight DXR on an Xbox Series X, you would definitely lose a lot of performance otherwise that you would be getting back on the PS5 side of things, because you'd have offline BVH. You could be doing like custom traversal. You could do a custom BVH entirely like they did in Frontiers of Pandora. If you weren't doing those things on consoles, it would probably be slower. So if you are having a much more portable game to Xbox Series X because you want to just run the DX12 code there, so you don't want to have to do like a super dedicated port, but just one that's a little bit more hands-off, then it would probably run slower than a really nicely specifically coded PS5 game.
Okay, fair enough. Hopefully we got some clarity on that one finally.
I would still say though that despite any of those differences, the two hardware it's the closest we've ever seen in consoles.
Yeah,
by far.
In terms of just like, I think most multi-platform games are equally good on both platforms, and the differences are usually more academic or just minor things outside of a few cases.
Yeah.
Like the Callisto example.
It was interesting to see the reaction to Tom's Elden Ring video. I mean, the PlayStation 5 runs faster, but you'd still want to play it on Xbox with a VR display.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And what's funny there, though, is that Capcom just demonstrated how they could fix that as well on the PS5.
Yeah, but
but they won't. Yeah, it's from software. They won't do it.
It was kind of amazing how DD2 got patched like after we made this video about Elden Ring and it being a poor experience. I was like, hey, look, here's another Japanese-based developer with engine troubles putting out a patch shortly after release. Wouldn't that be great if From Software did that? Apparently, Capcom can manage it. I don't know how. How do they? Yeah. It's such a hard industry. It's so hard.
Okay, let's move on.
Damn.
I don't know.
This question from Peter Karadimus. Hey gents, ! Could something like Auto SR be implemented on consoles for games running in back compat mode? Could this be a feature of Sony's PSSR implementation? So Auto SR is basically a system level AI-based upscaler that's built into the Windows on ARM laptops that have come out, and taps into the MPU that's built into the silicon, sort of a bespoke AI block there. I'm looking at Auto SR at the moment. It can't really be compared to DLSS or XESS because it does seem to be a post-process that happens after the fact. There's no game integration as such. So basically the system is taking a look at a final frame and then basically processing it, outputting it. So, it doesn't have any sort of consideration for things like text or HUD elements. They'll get upscaled the same as anything else. Mm-hmm. And I'd also say that it's quite limited in quality-wise, So the question is, could it be implemented for back compat modes on a console? Probably. Would you want it? Probably not. There's also something that developers are quite keen on, which is they're not really that wedded to the idea of platform holders messing about with their games at a system level. Mm-hmm. This is why, for example, stuff like FPS Boost from Microsoft is actually done in tandem with the developers, with their approval. And this idea, could this be a feature of Sony's PSSR implementation? Not really, because, well, Alex, from what we know about PSSR, it's very much sort of based on the same kind of inputs from DLSS, right? Which isn't what Auto SR is about.
Which is not what Auto SR are about. Yeah. So the prime distinction, of course, being access to things like motion vectors and anything other than just the raw color and HUD at the end. And I think I would like to see Sony still offer it as an option, just as much as I would love to see Sony offer an integer scaled option for stuff like that. But I would also imagine Microsoft, since they did come out with Auto SR now, I think it would be a great thing for the next box if they don't want to do it on Series X. I would like the options in general if they were to do it, but I still doubt it.
Yeah, I think we need to take a closer look at Auto SR because it's a weird beast from what I've seen so far, and it's wedded to a GPU that, let's face facts, is not particularly good.
John, are you in the Auto SR world right now? What's going on?
Yes, I am. I've entered the Auto SR world as we speak.
You are the AI that is upscaling this program.
For our podcast listeners here, they have no idea what's going on, but for some reason, John is wearing a MetaQuest 3 at this very... I don't know why. What are you doing there, John?
Oh, I wanted to check on my on the status of the Riven thing.
I thought you were going to say I was going to check my stocks in VR. So
check my stocks in VR.
You've literally checked out of this direct. This is quite remarkable.
Oh yeah, I'm just like I saw you sent me that video of Auto SR and it was so bad. I was just like, when this question came up, I'm just like, I'm done. I'm going into VR.
Yeah. Rich and I hopefully make a video.
Yeah, we'll do a video. Are you taking a short hiatus, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, I decided I can still see you though. I got the mixed reality thing going on here, so I got my screen here floating in front of me. Got you guys over here. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Enough. I think we can stop there and just move on to the next and final question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well, I better come out of VR then.
This one, maybe you would find this one quite interesting. This one from Nolen. 15 years ago, using low settings in PC gaming was considered graphical suicide. That's quite a statement. A last resort option that destroyed the artistic vision of games for minor performance gains. With the rise of the Steam Deck, however, and the Steam hardware survey showing people holding onto their GPUs for longer these days, I feel that more and more gamers are considering low settings as a meaningful option to increase performance with carefully curated cutbacks to the visuals. Do you have any insight into how developers craft these low presets to keep games scaling downwards? Why are these settings so much better today compared to a decade ago? I've also noticed that modern ports can have low presets that feel very carefully considered, but may still opt to turn off zero cost effects such as bloom, lens flares, basic depth of field, and anisotropic filtering. Why is this? Alex, this is quite an interesting topic, isn't it? Because the stigma of low settings is very much reduced these days, and a lot of games actually, Control is a great example, Alan Wake is too, both on Northlight. They look absolutely fine at low settings, and they are in fact similar to the console versions, which might be indicative for one plausible explanation.
Yeah, so consoles driving the low-end spec of what is driving development of many games would be a really good reason why that's the way they more elegantly scale that way, because the initial base thing that it is running on and the artistic vision is designed around is something that is maybe low settings already almost for a lot of settings. I think that's a great one. Another thing is, more than a decade ago, especially, the base cost of doing things that we now take for granted in rendering, SSAO, cascaded shadow maps, it was either on or off. And the reason why it was is because you really couldn't get much more out of them by turning certain levers down. And so you had this somewhat awkward scenario where the game's low settings would turn off basic things because there was really no way to scale them lower. Crysis is a somewhat okay example of that. I think it is. Yeah. Or the low settings. And I think it's just the low settings for most things turn off like shadow maps and things like that are very...
It looks horrendous.
It does look bad. It does. And also, there's a lot of other things like that. And also, that's an example, like pioneering effects that they didn't know how to scale. And then around the time GPUs got a lot better, and just more bass powerful, the thing they would start doing to scale effects is by changing internal sample counts and resolutions of effects. And for a lot of effects, I'll say like SSAO, volumetric lighting, screen space reflections, even depth of field to a certain degree, when you start turning down the resolution, they just get less precise and don't always alias a lot more. So a lot of people don't notice the differences for those kind of things. And I think that's why in a modern port, if you turn down like an Alan Wake 2 or even in Control without ray tracing, like if you just go between the various volumetric lighting settings, you're like, they all look pretty good. You know, they're just like less accurate. And you know, I think that's a big part of it, is just like the bar has been raised through technological innovation and progress over the last 10 to 12 years. So that scaling is now better. And I mean, I really wish there wasn't a stigma though, still about low settings. There are some occasional oddballs where I think the low settings are bad. And that's why I point them out. I pointed them out in Forspoken. I pointed them out in The Last of Us Part 1. Basically, the texture settings were just Quake 2 level textures for no good reason. I always say that because it's the first game that I always think, when I ever think about like poorly filtered textures and like really big textures, I always think of, for some reason, Quake 2, which is a bit mean because it's a cool game. But yeah, I think that's the one, like the one with the rare things where games really miss out on stuff. But nowadays, unlike in the from like 2010 to 2017, the ultra settings in games now, I'd say, are getting better because of ray tracing. They used to be like, your shadows are now really high res and really sharp. And it's like, okay, but all shadows in real life aren't really sharp. So the setting is just about aliasing reduction. And it's not very cool. And now it's like, oh, now your shadows are physically plausible. Or, oh, here's an entirely new GI system. Or, oh, reflections are now off screen thanks to ray tracing. And I think that's a bigger leap for the good use of ultra settings than they were for the last decade. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on low settings, John?
Just Alex, you're spot on. It's just things scale better these days. And it used to mean that low settings often look just bad, right?
Potato mode.
And that's no longer the case. Like the Steam Deck really made that clear to me when I'm tweaking games for that thing. Like when I saw, when you see something like Tekken 8 running it with HDR on this thing, even though the settings are pretty basement, it's like, dang, this actually still feels convincingly like proper Tekken 8. Mm-hmm. It looks darn good. But in the past, that was not the case. And Crysis, of course, is one of those great examples, but there's plenty of others where just doing like Shadow Mask, for instance, just using that technique came with such a cost that enabling it full stop was a gigantic performance hog. So if you went shadows low, be like, well, we'll just turn that off. And then you have no shadows. And so like you would just turn off all these major things that build the overall visual design of the game, and you just end up with something that looks incorrect and like kind of broken. I would say one that I remember loving was Halo Combat Evolved, because on Xbox it relied heavily on pixel shaders, right? Not everybody with a PC at that point obviously had a card capable of that, especially thanks to NVIDIA and X line of cards.
Yeah, I was about to say, boy. Like, I wonder why. That was GeForce 4 MXs that came out.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they had to create a fixed function pipeline for Halo Combat Evolved, which took away all the fancy shaders, and boy, did it look bad. It was so weird looking. I guess if you wanted to see what Halo might look like on a PS2, it's like a good preview of that.
Yeah, or like a Dreamcast Halo.
The problem there, though, is that if they had officially done other console ports without shaders, they probably would have come up with other solutions to simulate the effects. Whereas on the PC, it was just like, well, we'll just turn them off. So you just end up with something that looks incorrectly arted up. And that's what low settings used to mean. And it just doesn't anymore.
So the final part of his question, Nolan's question here, which is about the concept of turning off zero cost effects like bloom, lens flares, basic depth of field, and anisotropic filtering. A lot of this stuff, well, I can't say the same about AF, but a lot of this stuff is just like people don't like this stuff and want the ability to turn it off.
Yeah,
seems fair enough, right?
That's good stuff. But it is a little, I mean, you really, most of those, especially things like Bloom, I can't remember the last time Bloom was really expensive in anything almost.
Yeah.
But it used to be really expensive. Can you imagine that?
It
used to be really expensive. It was like a whole part of like Source. They're like, we now support Bloom, and your X800 XT is going to explode when you turn it on. You know?
High dynamic range pipeline, like in Far Cry 1.3.
Yeah, and it halves the frame rate when you turn it on, and
rate.
it's all it's really doing is making the colors better. It's incredible how things advance. But I'm happy with the situation we are currently in now for most games. Some games do it way better than others still, but it's better than having to turn off whole things wholesale.
Mm-hmm. And medium is actually turning out to be not bad.
A winner.
Actually,
it's a winner. Yeah.
Okay, that's the end of Supporter Q&A, and therefore the end of the show. Please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed the content, ring bells for things. DF Supporter Program, join us to get early access to each and every direct high-quality video downloads of everything we do, some bonus material and whatnot, access to our brilliant Discord. Lots going on there. Store.digitalfoundry.net to get a bespoke shirt like this one and our brand new mouse mat.
Or a coffee mug like this one.
Yes.
It's pretty good.
I do want a bigger coffee mug though.
One of those giant ones.
Rich, a lot of the comments always, when after you take a sip, is always like, look at the size of that thing.
Yeah, I know. We need a DF branded one. It's that.
Yeah.
Do we have any DF branded thermoses yet?
No.
You know, those.
We got to get on that.
What is the off-brand name for a thermos though? I mean, we couldn't call it the DF thermos, like the DF
Flask.
Insulated flask. Yeah.
Insulated
DF flask. But then we sound like alcoholics. I don't know.
Yeah, we are though. So it's. Wait, no. Rich is definitely not.
Rich is teetotaler.
We went to some strange places, but if you want a DF flask, you know where to ask.
Oh, you're talking
It
about
rhymes too.
hip flask.
Yeah.
Okay. Not a thermos.
Yeah.
We're expanding the range as we speak.
Yeah.
This is awesome. All right. Anyway, that's it. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and we'll see you next week.